Hi all, I have another fascinating game of Magnus Carlsen to go over. So this is in the Norway Chess Blitz, round 8. So this is really fast and furious. The players receive just 3 minutes each for all moves, but there is a 2-second increment from move 1. So Fabiano playing white kicked off with e4, and Magnus chooses g6, and after d4, not bishop g7, which you might expect, but the quite kind of humorous knight f6. And this has been, it seems to be called the Norwegian Defence. So I'm not sure when this opening was actually officially named that. There is also a Norwegian Defence in a variation of the Roy Lopez with an early knight a5 to get a light square bishop. But this is in this, so this is a kind of hybrid between a modern defence and an Alekhines defence. e5 was played by Fabiano, and one feature of this humorous feature is that the knight can actually go back to g7 if push comes to shove. If g4, the knight can go back to g7 to use that pigeonhole, which is normally reserved for the bishop. So we see bishop e2 though. If we just look at this as well from a positional perspective, if you ever get to play this as black, maybe for fun, if you play h5 here, it seems as though black is actually sometimes getting the f5 square and would actually get a small edge. This position represents a nice positional advantage. So anyway, bishop e2, and we see d6. You might think this is curious. Is this some sort of weird gambit? What's going on here with bishop takes? Well, e takes was played. On bishop takes, this variation with d takes e5 spells a potential disaster behind the scenes. The light square bishop has gone, and in fact d1 might be sensitive. Black could try a cheapo which involves queen d1 checkmate, potentially. That's on the horizon in some variations. So if we look at this with rook g8, for example, g3, and it's end of game after bishop g4, hitting the queen and going to play queen d1 checkmate. So that's rather amusing. If we just look at this again, on queen takes e5, this seems to be rather interesting play for black, even though black's a pawn down. After knight c6, black's getting the pawn back anyway. And if you might think, well, hold on, d takes e5. Again, black does have a certain amount of piece activity, and there's that disaster. So yeah, it's a tricky position. It really is. More critical. Well, knight c6 was mentioned. Yeah. On queen takes here, queen e4, this is probably, if you're playing Magnus Carlsen, maybe this is worth a punt. But I'm not really sure actually. It's very unusual opening territory. Black does seem to get a certain amount of piece activity. So yeah, we're looking at a viable opening choice for Blitz chess. A gift from the world champion popularizing this Norwegian variation. So anyway, side stories finished now. So bishop e2, d6. We have e takes d6, queen takes d6. So there's frontal pressure on the d pawn. We have knight c3, a6, and this is a really interesting positional plan now, that this bishop on c8, it would be nice to be able to do stuff like this to put pressure on the diagonal. So we have bishop e3, and now knight f6. Here it's slightly different variations. I mean, taking on d4, this, if white wants to do this, we end up potentially with an advantage for white. Maybe it's actually worth playing it there in this particular position, letting d4 go as a sort of yeah. But anyway, bishop e3 was played. The knight went back. Okay, so queen d2, bishop g7, castling queenside, black castles kingside, knight f3, and now b5. So it looks a very comfortable plan of bishop b7 and putting pressure on the light squares. The queen is kicked, but there's a nice square b6 here, king b1, and now c5, making it a kind of Sicilian defense style position. White probably doesn't want to play d5 because there's things like maybe c4 and b4 and c3. It looks pretty dangerous to play d5, and this diagonal looks actually quite dangerous as well. So we have this, which changes the structure significantly. That c-file pressure is pretty interesting. So knight e5, bishop b7. We have f3. White doesn't want to retreat back necessarily. If bishop f3, for example, if the knight had to retreat back, then black just plays knight c6, and there's no real problems for black here. Black might even have a small edge. So f3, just blunting that bishop, seems logical, keeping that nice aggressive knight on e5. It's challenged though, and the knight actually goes back. Curiously, c5 becomes a quick centre of attention. It is driven by tempo gains after all, after queen b6, bishop e3. So white's eyeing that c5 square now, and actually perches the knight on c5. And rook fd8 hitting the queen, and here volunteering the light square bishop. But actually we see g4, and now knight b4 with the idea of using that d5 square. There's a few of these pieces are on d5. We have knight takes now. On h4, it's actually pretty unpleasant to allow knight bd5. For example, knight takes, this position is really getting unpleasant. After queen e5, if the bishop ever retreats there, that looks at the bishop and b2. Okay, that's protected at the moment. But as an example, this is pretty unpleasant, with knight c3 check as a great idea here. Yeah, this is a really interesting tactical idea, doubling the pawns and double attacking the rook and the knight. So nifty tactics behind the scenes here, black getting an advantage in these variations. And if bishop d4, maybe taking first and then taking here, black's great here. So knight takes b7 was played, queen takes. So from the Norwegian defense, really unusual opening, Magnus has managed to somehow get a really comfortable looking position. Technically white has the bishop here, but the bishop on e2 looks a bit passive at the moment. We see bishop d4, knight c6. This is better to go here rather than d5. Change of plan here, because this knight takes and then bishop takes, and actually after h4 there's probably potential for an attack. White might be actually slightly better there. So knight c6, bishop goes back. Now knight e5 to use this lovely c4 outpost square on the semi-open file. So in Sicilian defense tradition, that's a classic iconic plan here. We have rook takes c3. This is a wonderful idea for a Blitz game, really drumming up the piece pressure and the responsibilities white has for his king safety. B takes, knight d5, that's protected. Now just building up the pressure on c3. So a very interesting exchange tag. f4, knight c4, bishop takes, king takes, bishop takes c4. Now the insertion of knight takes c3 check here. On b takes c4, this is really no good here because of the possibility of queen b2, and look at this, it's eyeing the king, so that's no good. White's winning there. So knight c3 check. The idea is this, to be able to play rook a4 to hit a2. We have rook d3 now, so stopping rook a4 because that could be taken. If f5, just to put this on the board with rook a4, this position is getting really dangerous for white with queen c4 incoming. So for example like this, and then b4, it's going to be all over. It's crushing. Yeah, it's absolutely crushing. Okay, so we have rook d3, and now okay, the exchange down, but a really interesting move. I mean, these pawns are slightly fragmented, so c2 is actually a good target here, and we see queen g2 hitting h2, putting pressure on c2, putting pressure on g4. White tries f5. As an example here, rook d2, there's actually a really nifty move here. I wonder if you can guess if black to play here. If I give you 5 seconds. Okay, if Magnus had this position, there's actually rook a4 threatening that classic checkmate pattern, and the queen's like overloaded here. Queen b2, queen takes d2. And if a3, the damage is done actually. b4 is incoming with a crushing position because the rook needed to put pressure on c3 as well. So well, it has to trade carefully. f5. And it looks as though, isn't this a mistake? Because black to play here surely has got a very lucrative move. Magnus played it. But there might have been a missed opportunity here. This looks like a really lucrative move. And it's only a blitz game, so who really cares? Most of it is fun, this game. So knight takes a2 was played. So clearly that looks really lucrative and sensible. And coordinated action against c2. That's the game continuation. But before we look at this with queen e1, there was actually technically knight e4, and this is really powerful, it turns out. So for example, c3, so leaving that a2 pawn alone to get this position, and now but rook a2 here and knight d2. Yeah, this is really interesting stuff. If this position, black's got a big advantage here. So it seems knight e4 might have been a more accurate move. If king b1, then actually taking out g4 might be handy here. Black's got 2 pawns here for the exchange, and still a huge amount of pressure. It's better for black. So anyway, knight takes a2, queen e1, very resourceful move, trying to get some checks in. Clearly, if king takes, then rook takes c2 check, wins the queen. So queen e1, trying to get some checks in. Knight b4, and we have queen e5 check. And now Magnus plays king h6. This is the safest place for the king. Now, really amusingly and shockingly, I thought, hold on a sec. Isn't there any resourceful way to get to the king? We see the move rook fd1. It turns out here that white might be okay with this, but what's funny here is this g5. Black to play here. What would you play in this position, which turns out to be really strong in this particular configuration? Very unusual position because of that pressure on c2. So black to play here. What would you play here? Okay, it turns out king h5 is fine for black, and it's actually a big advantage for black. It doesn't seem any way to get to the king in time. So here we just take that, and we can even go to h4, and it's just absolutely winning. So there's a safe spot for the king on h5, amusingly. The critical line, this should just be a perpetual there. Interestingly, but instead of knight a3 check, if we tried rook a4, then this position, actually this might actually be instead of knight a3 a better attempt, rook a4. So with the king on h6, this seems a little bit on the ridiculous side, but just go with this for a moment with the knight sack. Now, I'm not entirely sure. This is from Stockfish Analysis. It's just for the record, but it seems as though there's a big, gigantic king chase here, which could lead to an advantage for black. The king can be chased all the way down here, and eventually what happens is f6 happens, and even in the midst of that, because it blocks that diagonal, I think the king's safe enough after the check. And going back to g7. So say this happens, it's basically the queen gets lost and black ends up with a big advantage. That's actually possible for black to win that. So that's a really amusing line as well. I thought king h5 was amusing, but this line, instead of bailing out for perpetual, is really intriguing if this really is winning for black. So anyway, so that's on what I thought initially, and Stockfish thought initially, might have been equalizing at least, but maybe not. So rook fd1 was played, and here knight takes d3, rook takes c2, check, and these checks can be shielded now. g5, This is a very resourceful check. It can technically be taken, but much less hassle is what Magnus played is f6. If it is taken, there's a little bit of hassle with these checks, but they soon stop. Basically the fun stops for white there. So f6, and the game ended here. So Magnus's exchange sack created a lot of responsibilities, ongoing responsibilities for white's king safety here, and eventually black, with a very resourceful king placement and potential king placements, managed to get his attack through more effectively, it seems. So there's a lot of fun in these blitz games, and it shows also some very interesting, surprising opening weapons of choice. So that's intriguing to me, the kind of blitz and rapid time control opening weapons that are being used, what the super gems might think is more appropriate, because a lot of chess is online is blitz anyway. So maybe more of us should be trying this Norwegian defense. What do you think? Will you be trying the Norwegian defense anytime soon? Okay, if you enjoyed this video, remember you can try and play against other YouTubers or me. If you look at that link, that bit.ly link there, I'll be able to challenge you for a game if you use that bit.ly link and register with my 105 free code. So I'm playing hundreds of people at the moment on ChessPod, so I hope you check that out. So bit.ly 2 capital Y V A 5MB. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoy these Magnus Carlsen games this week. It's been good, fun, I think. Okay, thanks very much.